Thank you everyone for attending the National Farmers Union webinar series, NF University. Our presenter today is Dr. Alyssa Centovani, and the topic is, do we have the right to repair in Canada? The right to repair goes beyond the ability for consumers to repair electronics, appliances, and machinery. The right to repair is about independence and freedom from major manufacturers in order to have access to timely and inexpensive repairs, as well as operability between products that suit the needs of consumers and farm businesses. It is also about affordability and sustainability. Repairability and durability of products ensures that Canadians do not have to rebuy products that were intentionally designed to be replaced with newer products, also known as planned obsolescence. Dr. Alyssa Centovani will present on the current state of the right to repair in Canada, including legislation on repairability, interoperability, and durability. And our presenter today, Dr. Alyssa Centovani, is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at the University of Western Ontario. Alyssa co-directs the Starling Center for Just Technologies and Just Societies and serves as a core expert in the AI Insights for Policymakers program. She's also a co-founder and the executive director of the Canadian Repair Coalition and is an affiliate member of the Rotman Institute of Philosophy. Alyssa has provided expert testimony before the Canadian House of Commons and the Senate on two copyright reform measures that received royal assent in November 2024. Alyssa, I will pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, James. Let's see if I can get my slides to work here. How does that look for you?
Looks great.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation to be here. And thanks to all of you for attending. So I'm going to talk today about the right to repair in Canada. The title of the talk is a question, and it's pretty simple to answer, actually. The answer is no, we don't have the right to repair in Canada. But obviously, it's a bit more complex than just that simple answer. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about sort of the context, what I mean by repair, what kind of controversies are arising that have given sort of energy to this right to repair movement. I'll talk about some of the, let's see if I can change my slide now. There we go. I'll talk about what some of the impediments to repair are, the imperatives of the right to repair movement, and leave you with some considerations and conclusions going forward. So simply put, repair is about the condition of something. We can say that our car is in good repair, meaning that it gets us from point A to point B and is fit for its purpose. Repair can also relate to things that are not primarily about functionality, but about, the aesthetic condition of something. So if we tear the sleeve on our favorite shirt, let's say, we might wish to repair it to return it to some sort of more perfect earlier state. But most often when we talk about repair in this context, we're talking about the repair of functionality, restoring functionality to something. So anything can be the subject or object of repair. It can include our technological objects, our bodies, our relationship, our social political systems, our environment. And breakdown is a normal sort of feature, an inescapable feature of existence, right? Everything will eventually fall apart, it will break. And so repair, therefore, is an attempt to, or an effort to resist or perhaps even reverse for a time this sort of ineluctable gravity of breakdown. My talk today is going to focus primarily on the repair of technological objects, which in itself is a very broad category. The reason why I'm focusing on those is because there are some sort of threats to our ability to repair that have been increasing in sort of ferocity over the last several years. I'm hoping that in addition to sort of, giving you a big picture understanding of what the issues are, that that I'll convince you of this idea that the right to repair is not simply about whether or not we can fix our things, but that our ability to fix our things is actually tied up to broader questions about whether we can fix our social, economic, political, environmental problems or systems and improve our own condition as people living in the world and the well-being as well of those around us. So my entry into this actually came through farming and agriculture. You might be familiar with a lot of the controversies stemming from John Deere's restrictions on repairs. Manufacturers of farm equipment, like John Deere, are using a variety of techniques to prevent farmers and independent repair technicians from being able to fix or modify their equipment. And fixing and modifying agricultural equipment is something that has been, central to the practice of farming for many, many decades. And so when John Deere and other manufacturers began impeding those practices that had been long-standing sort of normal practices in the industry, people noticed and farmers started fighting back. Just recently, actually, the FTC in the United States, that's the Federal Trade Commission, has partnered with a few different states to sue John Deere for right to repair under competition law theories, basically saying that that John Deere is engaging in anti-competitive business practices by impeding repair in the various ways that it does, which I'll touch on in a few minutes. But impediments to repair cross all, like literally all industries and all sectors. So you may have also heard during like the first months of the COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of disruptions to the global sort of supply chain networks, and hospitals were having trouble fixing their equipment or having a sufficient supply of let's say, parts to keep their ventilators, for example, running. And so there was a situation in Italy where these two individuals that you can see on the screen here found a way to 3D print a replacement part for ventilators in Italy so that they could keep them running, so that hospitals could use them to treat COVID patients. And the manufacturers of those ventilators threatened to sue them based on sort of patent infringement theories. So we also see impediments to repair of medical devices and equipment, things that are common in hospitals, but also things that many people rely on just to go about their day-to-day lives. So there's also impediments to fixing wheelchairs, right? And to the extent that many people rely on these, the functionality of these kinds of devices to actually carry out their basic day-to-day tasks and live their lives, it's incredibly troubling when they have to wait 7 weeks or longer, as the study revealed, to have their wheelchair repaired because there are so many restrictions on repair. And it can even go farther than that. So it's not just that we rely on technologies to live our lives as like an appendage. Sometimes medical devices are literally implanted in our bodies, and even in those cases, this is a situation involving retinal eye implants. Even in those cases, there may be restrictions on repair. So in this case, there was a company that created a retinal implant that would allow people who were blind to see light. And the company went out of business and stopped supporting those implants. And so these people have these medical devices literally in their bodies that are broken and that can't be repaired. And even if we think about something like national defense, these are all examples from the US, which, given recent reports, we might question the seriousness to which they take their sort of national defense security, but nevertheless, there's been many documented cases of even being restricted from being able to repair its own military equipment because of these manufacturer restrictions on repair. And we have this in Canada as well. So this is not just limited to the US. So there's lots and lots of sort of big problematic stories that come up in the press. Here's another one that I just came across last week, which is that the Air Force is having to basically create a competition to encourage everyday citizens to reverse engineer parts of its stealth bomber because it doesn't know how to create replacement parts to fix it. And so this is a really sort of widespread and systemic problem. And it's easy to sort of understand the importance of the right to repair when we think about it in these sort of big, critical sectors like agriculture, like healthcare, like defense, because these are, critical industries and infrastructures that we all rely on. But the right to repair also really cuts across really all aspects of our lives, of our day-to-day lives, even if we're not involved in these other sectors that I just mentioned. And so what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about why repair matters. And I want to talk about three specific reasons in particular why we need the right to repair. And I'm going to draw upon some examples to sort of make my points a little bit more concrete using smartphones, which I'm guessing everybody has at least one of. So this is a technology that's pretty ubiquitous for most people living in Canada. And so we could even, while the next few minutes pass, you could even just kind of hold on to your phone and look at it and, grab onto it while I walk through some of the implications here, if you would like. So a new screen for a smartphone can be purchased from a third-party seller for as little as $50. If you have an iPhone, Apple will charge you something like $300 to get your screen fixed. And, cracked screens on smartphones are really like the flat tire of the 21st century, right? Like it's a really fragile material. Everybody uses it. They break all the time. So this is a repair that's very, very common. An Apple iPhone costs about $350 to be produced, and it sells for well over $1,000. So Apple, for every phone that they sell, they have a profit margin of about 64%. Apple sells hundreds of millions of phones every year and earns hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue from its sales. But Apple claims that it loses money on repair. That's one of the justifications that it makes for some of its restrictions. So Apple has come up with a lot of creative strategies for pushing replacement over repair. But when repair is available, accessible, affordable, convenient for consumers will tend to choose to fix what they already have rather than spending money on getting something new. So why do we care about repair? There are economic factors. It's cheaper, or it should be cheaper, to fix what we already have rather than buying something new. In addition, because most repairs take place locally, repair also supports local economies. In addition, when you have when you know that repair of an item is possible, that supports healthy secondary markets, right? Because you're not going to go and buy something used from a secondhand store, let's say, if you're not sure if it's working or not, or if it might not be working, that it's going to be really difficult, costly, impossible to get it fixed, right? So if everybody kind of understands that things are generally fixable, that really helps secondary markets, which is important for, more budget-minded consumers, but also even for those of us who might wish to purchase new things instead of used things. Healthy secondary markets create downward pressure on the price of new things as well, right? So there's lots and lots of economic reasons why right to repair is important. There are also really important environmental factors as well, right? So even though it might seem sometimes like some of these technologies or these smartphones, let's say, come from the future, they come from the earth. Every smartphone contains at least 75 of the 83 known stable elements and 16 of the 17 rare earth metals. And these are materials which are almost always found commingling with dangerous stuff in the ground, like thorium and uranium. Building a single 4.5-ounce iPhone requires extracting 34 kilograms of ore from the earth. That's then blasted with an enormous amount of water and chemicals to sort of separate out the materials that are desired. These processes are environmentally violent and result in toxic radioactive slurry that makes people in nearby communities terribly sick. More often than not, this extraction process happens in places with weak or non-existent environmental protections. When we move from the extraction to the manufacturing, it doesn't really get any better in terms of the environmental impacts. So the manufacturing process also uses a tremendous amount of water and energy. In the case of smartphones and in the case of microchip production in general, that requires the use of fluorinated gases, including perfluorocarbons and nitrogen trifluorides, which are required to etch patterns onto and clean microchips. And these gases are incredibly volatile. They melt concrete, sand, and asbestos on contact. They're also over 16,000 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping atmospheric heat. And the Environmental Protection Agency in the US estimates that as much as 80% of these gases escape the manufacturing facilities and make their way into the air during the manufacturing process. That's just one example of one gas. Shipping and distribution is also terrible for the environment. 90% of trade relies on ocean-going freighters, which are one of the most polluting industries on the planet. And in terms of what happens when we're done with our smartphone, which on average is every 2 years, the UN reports that discarded consumer electronics account for 54 million metric tons of e-waste. To wrap your head around how much e-waste that is, if you recall a few years back when the Suez Canal was blocked by that massive freight ship that was called the Ever Givens, and if you saw pictures of it, right, you saw this, just like the scale of this massive ship and how it was loaded with all the freight. And every year we produce 270 pounds. The weight we produce the weight of the equivalent of 270 of those massive ships, those Ever Given ships that end up in our landfills. E-waste accounts for 70% of the toxic waste in landfills. And again, we have to recognize here that most of the environmental costs of these impediments to repair or our habits of consumption in general are negative externalities, meaning that the parties to the transaction are not the ones who have to carry the burden of the transaction. So we can largely avoid the immediate effects or consequences of what we've just described, while invisible others cannot. So our digital consumerism is wreaking havoc on the planet, and it's being subsidized unwittingly by those who are in the most vulnerable positions due to poverty or age or various political factors. And the effects are compounded by systemic discrimination on the basis of race, gender, ethnicity here in North America and Canada and elsewhere around the globe. So right to repair is not going to wipe the slate clean of what I just described, but extending the useful life of the things that we already have cuts down on some of these harms. It sort of tempers some of these harms that I'm talking about to the environment, to our pocketbooks, to human life caused by these processes of extraction, manufacture, distribution, and disposal. The third factor is one that gets much less attention in sort of right to repair discourse, and that is those are the social factors. So repair is important because it also helps us flourish as people and as communities. For better or for worse, some technologies like smartphones and obviously some of the earlier examples that I just mentioned have become, indispensable appendages. They're extensions of our bodies, of our brains. We rely on them. And yet they're being designed and sort of deployed in ways that make us simultaneously increasingly dependent on them and reliant on them, but also more limited in our ability to understand how they work, to be able to fix them, to be able to, exercise self-determination or autonomous control over how we use them in our lives. And so repair is therefore empowering. It helps us move from sort of passive dependent relationship with our things, and so it promotes, digital citizenship. It helps us refine our cognitive skills. It fosters positive traits like creativity and problem solving and learning. It also fosters community and builds sort of mutual support networks. So a culture and a culture and an economy that prioritizes replacement over repair and newness over continuity is one that I think sort of devalues those things in ourselves too, in our relationships. Some of the best parts of what it means to be human. Okay, this is just a quote from an author, Flannery O'Connor, where she said that there's something in us that demands a redemptive act, that demands that whatever falls at least be offered a chance to be restored, and that really resonated with me. So before I jump into talking about some of the specific impediments, I want to talk about how I think about policymaking and regulation in this space. So oftentimes, right to repair is treated as a primarily or even purely like technical matter, like when technologies break, it's about like knowing how to, fix them and get in there with tools and DIY or whatever. That is true-ish, but I sort of argue and emphasize in my research and my work that repair is better understood as a socio-technical challenge. And I have a little graph here which sort of describes what I mean by that, which is that the right to repair is not just about the way that technologies are designed, right? It's also about social practices around our use of technologies, the role that they play in our lives, and it also ties into things like law and policy. And so when I think about the right to repair, I think about what I call the socio-technical knot, which are these three strands sort of entangled together. And so if you sort of tug on any one of these strands, it's going to affect the others. So if you make changes to design, let's say, it's going to have impacts on social practice and law and policy. And if you make a new law, it's going to change how things are designed and how people use them. That's the basic idea. I'm going to talk a little bit about policy logic as well, which is, I think, a helpful approach oriented around sort of identifying what the impediments are to repair and having that be the sort of guiding signal to helping us figure out what policy imperatives we should put in place. And again, as I'll sort of return to towards the end, I'm going to emphasize that what we need is our solutions that take into account the social aspects of repair and not merely the technical ones, and that this requires a value-centered approach. So this is the idea of what a socio-technical knot, let's say, is, but in practice, these problems are messy. They look more like this. And so what policy tries to do is essentially take that messy knot and turn it into knots like these on the other side of the screen, right? So to make it really neat and tidy and make sense. And when that happens, some of those like nuances, particularly the social nuances, I think, of the problem get lost. And so that's sort of one of the things that I try to focus on in my work is making sure we don't lose the fact that this is a human, these are human problems, and the solutions that we design need to attend to the human desires and needs in addition to the technical ones. I'm going to skip that for now. Okay, so in my work, I talk about 6 impediments to repair. And I'm going to just run through, try to be maybe sort of brief as I run through them. But these are the various ways that in which repair is impeded. So the first way deals with design. And the way things are designed can either promote repairability, it can undermine repairability, it can be sort of agnostic, ambivalent to repairability. And so if we think about, that's a picture of an everlasting gobstopper, if you know the Roald Dahl book. But that was, I use that here because there was a time when things were designed in ways that, like the goal of the manufacturer was to make something that would sort of last forever, right? So you could buy the thing from them and the quality durability was so good and long lasting that that you might only have to buy it once, right? And so we've certainly moved away from that kind of design approach. Now we have a design that is really more of a throwaway kind of design. So those are Apple. I know I'm picking a lot on Apple, but they're an easy target in this context. Those are Apple AirPods. Apple sells several dozen millions of those each year, and they retail for somewhere around $160 for a basic version, or just under twice that much for the Pro model. These are incredibly easy to lose, and they're literally impossible to repair. So because they're glued and soldered together, you can't actually open them up and replace the battery. They're also pretty much a necessity to have because Apple decided to design away the standard headphone jack on its phones a few years ago. And so this choice of designing away the standard headphone jack on their phone and adhering to this glue over screw design approach is not ethically neutral, right? So designers are choice architects. Their choices influence our own. And I think these kinds of choices, at best, evidence ambivalence toward repair, but and at worst, and I think actually more realistically, reflect an outright hostility to it. This is a quote by Tim Wu, where he's just emphasizing that design is the determinant along with your will. Like, I think we overemphasize how much our free will matters, but design actually really guides and controls our decision making in all sorts of ways. The next impediment I want to talk about are business strategies. And here what I mean are sort of the way that businesses incentivize replacement over repair. So this is a photo of Apple's trade-in program. So if your phone breaks, if your screen breaks, you go into an Apple store to get it fixed, and you discover that the cost of the repair that you need is $300, but then they offer you the chance to upgrade to a new phone for basically that much, or maybe $500, something a little bit more. They're doing this because they want to incentivize a new sale, because it looks good for them in their books. And so there's lots of ways in which our decisions are sort of subtly or not so subtly manipulated. So incentivizing replacement over repair is one kind of business strategy that we see a lot here. Another one is for more durable goods like tractors, let's say, is to create a business model that enables them to capture the downstream repair market. And they do that by excluding, let's say, independent third-party repair service providers from being able to fix their equipment. And so it's not like you buy a thing and then that's, the deal is done and everybody goes on their merry way. But instead, like this thing that you've bought is sort of tethered to the original manufacturer, and anytime it needs to be maintained or repaired, that sort of original equipment manufacturer will reach its long arm out and sort of force you to work with them and pay their prices. So this is a quote by Brooke Stevens, and it it relates to this shift in business strategies that took place post World War II, when it was almost like there were policies that were explicitly saying it was our patriotic duty to buy more things more often. And so this is where we saw like this real shift happen, where manufacturers were trying to instill in the buyer the desire to own something a little newer, a little better, a little sooner than is necessary. And this is where we begin to see like these like very small sort of micro iterations on design, where, you'll sort of look at your neighbor and say, oh, they have like a 2018 model versus a 2014 model of something. Like there's all these little cues. And that's purposefully done to try to sort of incentivize people to buy things quicker as well. The next category of impediment I want to mention are material asymmetries, and this is where access to material resources like proprietary tools or replacement parts are impeded. So this is a picture of a sort of specialized driver called a spanner, but there's lots and lots of sort of proprietary tools and that are difficult or impossible to obtain that might be required to undertake repairs, or replacement parts that are not made available. Similarly, there are information asymmetries, and this is where things like manuals or schematics or other information that would be necessary to undertake a repair is locked up and inaccessible. I found this really cool old manual, like a tank repair manual, and it was really neat to see because it was a manual that lived in the tank and showed people how to repair like literally everything that could possibly go wrong on the tank with very few tools or resources, with the idea being, of course, that, if you're in the field, you're not going to be able to, wait to get the right part. Like you're going to have to sort of kludge a solution together. And so, yeah, that was really neat to look at. I also wanted to mention that there's certain kinds of technologies, what are sometimes called smart technologies, that are pretty much impossible to repair, or I guess I would say um, that by design, they're sort of fundamentally incompatible with repair. And the reason for that is because, like the brains of smart technologies, live somewhere else, right? They're not like in the device itself, but they live on a server in the cloud somewhere. And so there's lots and lots of horror stories about manufacturers sort of remotely bricking smart technologies. So they just, like those retinal implants I mentioned, they just like go out of business, let's say, or they push an update that sort of bricks the device. This is a picture of the Jibo robot, which was, it won, I think, Best Inventions of 2017. And this was like a sort of it was it was kind of like an Alexa, I guess, like a personal assistant, social robot, but it interacted. It sort of fostered more of a social relationship. And And it was bricked. Like people were forming relationships and attachments to this little Jibo robot. And then one day, it comes on and it says basically, like, I have to go goodbye now. Like it was this actually incredibly sad message. I wish that I had it in front of me so I could read it to you. But it was like maybe someday in the future when robots are better made, like my future relative robot will come and say hi to you on my behalf or something like that. It was kind of crazy. And then it just shut down, powered off for good. And all these people were left with these little dead Jibos in their homes. Okay, the fifth impediment I want to talk about are laws. And so that's a picture of me testifying. I'm the one with the colorful background and the red. That's Scott Smith to my just next to me there, who is really active in right to repair in the agriculture space. And my colleague sort of diagonally there is Anthony Rossborough, who is the co-founder of Can Repair with me. But there's many laws that are used to impede the right to repair. Copyright and intellectual property law are some of the most significant constraints on repair. So if you were wondering at the beginning of the talk, for example, like why farmers are no longer able to fix their tractors or their combines, or why military members of the military can no longer fix their tanks, it oftentimes has to do with copyright law. So the issue is that many of our technologies now are computerized. This means that they have little bits of code embedded in them. And code is protected under copyright law as a literary work, just like a poem or a novel is. And so there's a provision in the Copyright Act that prevents the circumvention of digital locks for, so basically, manufacturers will embed code or software or little computers into their equipment. They'll put a digital lock on it, which sort of controls access, and then that prevents people from being able to find out what's wrong with it and to be able to fix it. And so I testified on a bill that provided an exemption to that little piece of copyright law. It was Bill C-244, and that provided an exemption to these, anti-circumvention provisions so that people could go in and break those digital locks if they needed to for diagnosis, maintenance, and repair. That was passed. It received royal assent last November. It doesn't sort of solve the whole problem, though, because it only provides that protection to individuals. It doesn't provide protection to those who might sell services to do that, or who might make tools and traffic tools to allow people to circumvent digital locks. So, it is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't solve the problem. And there was sort of a partner bill to that, which was Bill C-294 that dealt with interoperability, which is a related issue to repair, but that's interoperability is about being able to buy something from manufacturer A and have it like work with and connect with something you bought from manufacturer B. And the same problem exists there too, where it only applies to individuals and not to third-party sellers or the makers of those tools. Outside of copyright, the other laws that can impede repair include competition law. So we do have competition laws that are intended to prevent or thwart anti-competitive business practices. And much of what I've been describing here, I think, are pretty clearly anti-competitive practices, right? So what we haven't seen, though, are those laws used effectively to stop manufacturers from doing what they're doing. That lawsuit against John Deere that I mentioned at the beginning, that is an example of competition law sort of stepping in to try to create a corrective there. But we'll have to see how that pans out. And again, so far in Canada, it has not been effectively used, in my opinion. There's also consumer protection related laws and contract related laws that play a role here too. And those are more the purview of the provinces. So copyright and competition, those are federal jurisdiction issues. At the provincial level, though, we have consumer protection laws, things that deal with warranties, like what you can rely on in terms of what kind of guarantees are baked into the sale or purchase of any kind of item. We've seen, we have seen a bill passed in Quebec. That was Bill, I think, 59. And that purports to or aims to prevent planned obsolescence. It also creates a new warranty, which is called a warranty of good working order. And it does a number of other things. We're still sort of waiting to see what the impact of that is in practice. And then I'll just mention here in Ontario, there is a bill that's been tabled that deals with right to repair over things like wheelchairs and some sort of specific consumer technologies. I've spoken to the author of that bill. I think because of the sort of overall state of politics in the province, that there was not a sense that there was a strong likelihood that that bill would move forward. But I think what we're going to start seeing is more provincial activity to get consumer protection laws changed to help promote right to repair. Okay, the last impediment is our social factors, are related to social factors, I should say. And these are the ones that are least emphasized, least studied. But again, you know, going back to that policy knot that I mentioned at the beginning, right? Right to repair is not just a technical challenge, it's a socio-technical one. And so there's always this tension of finding the right balance between like what's technically feasible and what's socially tenable. And I think what we're seeing is that the practices of manufacturers are technically feasible, but they're not socially tenable, right? These are not things that we want to have happen. And so what we need to do is come up with corrective measures in terms of policies and laws and other things that can help sort of balance those interests out a little bit more. And I also think it's important to understand, to get a better handle on what the social impediments are so that when we do move towards policy solutions, our policies will attend to what we actually want and need. And so this is a book that I grew up with, actually. So this is a book that was in my house growing up. And it was like a how to fix stuff book written by Charlotte Slater. She was actually a journalist who had a weekly column that was syndicated in the Detroit News. And every week she would teach you. I mean, her audience was targeting women specifically to sort of empower women to be able to fix things. And so she says in this book, you know, this is a handbook to liberate women from the tyranny of waiting. The idea being like, you know, you don't want to wait for a handyman or wait for your husband or partner or, you know, a guy. Like you can do this yourself. And so these are the kinds of things that these are the kinds of like social factors that I don't think are well reflected in current right to repair discourse, particularly because much of the discourse is really like super technical. It's like very like DIY, like boys and toys kind of a discourse where like the people who talk about it and who advocate for it oftentimes and who are like in it are people who really like, you know, hacking their equipment and get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And the reality is that there's, you know, there are many people for whom that is not something that they want to do, and we need to create solutions that also attend to them. And in terms of like the legal, the laws that I just mentioned that were just passed, I mean, the fact that they only protect individuals, right? But they don't protect service providers who get paid to do it commercially or the people who make and sell the tools to let us do it. I mean, I think that's tying in here, right? Like it's only protecting the people who are the DIY tech people who want to, let's say, you know, take their refrigerator apart to fix it or their car or their tractor or whatever it happens to be. This is a picture of a toy. Um, I'm gonna maybe skip it, although I'm happy to come back to it. This is my daughter's toy, actually, and the reason why I included it here is because the toy is not broken. It was designed to look like it was broken. And so I was like, what is happening in this world that toys are now being sold that look like broken screens, broken smartphones? And like, what is that telling us about how breakdown is being normalized in our society? Okay, I know James is probably getting nervous about how much time I'm taking, but I'm going to shift now to talk about the imperatives of the right to repair movement. So I've talked about all of the impediments. Now I want to talk about like, well, what's happening to fix it? And I would say that there are different approaches and attitudes towards the imperatives depending on where you are. So in the EU, the focus there tends to be on circular economy and sustainability, like that is the main thing. Typically, there's very little focus actually on individual consumers. Like most of the emphasis is on changing manufacturers' practices um, to, let's say, alter their business model, to provide um, uh, rebates for repair or tax breaks for repair or other kinds of things like that. In the US, it is very much an individualistic approach that's super focused on owners' rights, that this is a question of, you know, autonomy, that if I buy something, I should be able to fix it. And so that's really like the main flavor of right to repair in the US. In addition, it tends to be like the sort of legislative or policy solutions tend to be state by state. So we're not seeing a lot of action at the federal level in the US. We are seeing lots of action at the state level. And so just recently, like there was a tipping point where now every single state in the United States, all 50 of them have put forward some kind of a right to repair bill. Several of them have passed. They tend to be industry specific bills. So, you know, there might be a bill that focuses only on agriculture or only on consumer electronics or only on automotive, right? So there's no sort of sweeping um, industry agnostic bills. In Canada, we've seen, like I said, some action at the federal level with regard to these copyright reforms, and we've seen a little bit of action at the provincial level. I think that we need more, certainly, and there is There is a lot of advocacy and grassroots efforts taking place, including Can Repair and others. And maybe I'll talk about that in just a moment here. But these are some examples of like what some of the right to repair movements are asking for. So this is ifixit.org. They're the main right to repair advocacy group in the US. They've done an tremendous, excellent job. If you ever need like specialized tools to fix something or like a video showing you how to fix something, go to ifixit.org. I was able to buy a laptop battery from them, all the tools that I needed. They had videos showing me how to replace the battery in my laptop. So they're a really great organization. And you can see here, we have the right to open what we own, to repair our things, right? It's very individualistic though. This is an example from Equiterre, which is an organization in Quebec that tends to be focused on environmental issues, but they've also been very active in the right to repair space. And they say the components of a right to repair include these sort of 4 factors. And you can see there's like not so much of an emphasis on sort of individual, sort of libertarian focus. And then there's Can Repair, which is an advocacy group that I co-founded. James is a part of it. I welcome you all to join if you're interested. We're a very friendly group. And we work together to understand the challenges of repair in Canada and to advocate for, repairability and durability and interoperability across Canada and advancing legislative reforms. So I've already mentioned some of these legal reforms that we've seen. I think our next sort of steps are going to be to focus on introducing new bills in the other provinces in the coming year, like doing some model legislation that we can hand to regulators to sort of consider. And then I just wanted to end here by saying, again, to be able to make regulations that respond to the needs and desires of Canadians, I think it's important that we understand what the Canadian story is, because it's not, I think, the same as the EU, and it's not the same as the US story on repair. And so I've done a lot of interviews in my research to talk to people about what are the values that are embedded in repair or acts of repair? Like, why is this important to you? And so these are just some quotes from some of the people that I talked to. They talk about problem solving. There's this quote here, I was useful once, I want to be useful again. I certainly got from my participants a sense that that idea of continuity was really important, like that there was tremendous value, not just sort of instrumental value, but like real rich sort of human value to being able to, teach your child or your grandchild like how to fix something and like go through that process together. And that was something that people were missing. There's also this quote here about someone being afraid. And I think a lot of us are sort of taught to be afraid of our technologies, like either we'll make it worse or we'll hurt ourselves or it will explode or something really bad will happen. It's power, another participant said. Someone reflected on, when they were young, they would break their toys to see what was inside. And it was a way to learn, to break things open and see how they worked and try to put them together. We don't need more stuff in the world. This make-do attitude. And so it's been very nice for me to be able to talk to people about their experiences through repair and learn more about it, and then bring that to government. So this was the way that I ended my opening statement when I testified before the House of Commons on their right to repair bill, because I really wanted to make sure that the social aspects of this problem were being attended to. And so I said, every act of repair is embedded with important human values. These include productivist values like learning, skill development, self-efficacy, self-determination, and digital citizenship, and also non-productivist values like continuity, heritage, hope, mutual support, and meaning making that together make up the fabric of a richer, more resilient, more livable society and enable us collectively to project a more hospitable, habitable, and humane shared future. And I believe that. So I'm just going to leave you with these last few points here. So I think that the way that I think about it and what I've tried to cover today in my talk is to sort of like walk through what I call the policy logic here, which is, identifying reverse salience or these impediments, these sticking points, because they provide a lot of good information about how to orient action around their removal. But there's also limits to that kind of a policy approach, right? And the limits are particularly that you lose all that nuance and messiness of the social aspects of the problem. I also think it's important to recognize that like the market is failing here. People, I didn't really talk about this too much, but there's not a lot of choice. Consumers don't have a lot of choice here because of the market failures. We are often locked into maintaining relationships with the companies we purchase things from, or for long beyond after we've made our purchase. And so we need to think about ways to correct those market failures and use hopefully the competition laws we have more effectively to temper some of those anti-competitive practices. Again, I emphasize the socio-technical approach and value-centered approaches to these problems. The fact that we need to figure out what Canada's story is here so that we can emphasize it and make better laws and regulations to attend to the particular interests and needs of Canadians. And then, of course, in terms of like what any of us can do on these things, we can consume less, be more careful about what we consume, be more engaged and active in grassroots organizations. You probably have a repair cafe in your town, or maybe you have a library that will lend tools or other kinds of resources. You can join Can Repair. I would love to see you there, or other advocacy groups. You can call your MPs. Because we cannot afford to be broken people with broken things living in a broken world. And that's it. I know I went over, James, I'm sorry, but that's it. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you, Alyssa. I just want to clarify that the NFU as an organization is a member of Can Repair, I believe. But you are all also welcome to join in monthly meetings. There is very good conversation, and absolutely there should be more people there talking about agriculture because right now there's really just two of us.